Hello, everyone. Salvete, as they would say in Latin. Welcome. Hope everyone is having a fantastic day. We're going to be starting something new with 2025. We're going to be having class. Now, I know plenty of people have had enough lessons for a lifetime, especially when you want to have fun. You might not want to come to class, but that's okay, because here we're learning about mythology. Don't have to do any math. You don't have to do any writing. There's no homework. There's no tests. It's just sit, listen, ask questions, and enjoy. This is our very first class, so again, welcome. And if you're any familiar with this channel, you might know what the channel mascot is. Let me know in the comments real quick. And anybody who shows up into chat, you are always free to ask me any questions that you might have on mythology, history, and the like. So, first and foremost, I myself am not an expert. I am just someone who very much enjoys mythology. Classical mythology, pre-classic, very ancient, any and all throughout the entire world. So if you are someone who enjoys mythology like myself, then feel free to follow me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/mythology and gaming. You can also subscribe to my main channels, My Mythology in Gaming, where we do explanations and explorations of our favorite video games and the myths and legends that go behind it, or that come from it, as well as my Mythology and Gaming plays, where I post most of my Twitch VODs and even some of my shorts. So, welcome once again. As I had stated earlier, gave you all plenty of time to write down in the comments who you might think our first lesson is going to be. And it's our channel mascot. It is none other than the mistress of snakes herself, Medusa. I am excited for this one because I believe Medusa is probably the best example of mythology being brought into the modern era, or the ever-evolving thought behind mythology. So, my reasoning behind this is the fact that not only the story of Medusa herself, but of her lineage, of her sisters, her race, essentially, the Gorgons, are probably one of the most ancient in Mediterranean belief, Mediterranean culture, and even around the world. So, as a preface, Medusa and the Gorgons themselves, or the race of monsters that had snakes for hair, would have stone-like gazes, stone powers, or powers to turn people into stone with their gaze, and being a almost guardian of sorts throughout time. They start, I think it's around 5,000 BCE, and then have continued to evolve since then. So it is super fitting to me to not only start our classes with Medusa, or to start our class lessons with Medusa, but to have her as our mascot. So, first and foremost, as you can see here, Medusa is, in fact, a female figure within classical art, classical belief, and classical mythology. Greeks, especially the Greeks, featured women a lot in their stories of mythology, as women were a huge part. Now, of course, men and women held big parts in classical belief. However, women held a very interesting role in that they were not only the caretakers of the home, but were also seen as the protectors of the home. I mean, men as well. However, a lot of them did everything else. You know, if you look at classical Greek culture, a lot of the men actually went out and did everything for their home, their life, their children, their brides, their, you know, whomever they were looking out for. They were the ones responsible for them. So the women were responsible for the home. And since they were the ones who took care of the children, they were the ones telling the stories of, you know, the unknown, or their religion to the next generation, their children. And one creature that had been created to sort of protect the home from intruders, invaders, and those who were seen as arbiters of evil, essentially, or harm doing, or wrongdoing in general. They needed a force to stop them. So the creation of the Gorgons was made, or was started. And I unfortunately couldn't find the original Gorgon art, because there's one piece of art that is a great example of this. Not this one that's up on the screen right now, but it's this piece of stonework that was used. Bale, thank you so much for the follow. Super appreciate it. The Gorgon was created to be essentially a guardian of the home. This is why we see the faces of the Gorgons, of Medusa herself, facing the audience, for lack of a better term. The viewer, I should say. So if we look over, here we go. So we're going to switch over to Medusa art and Greek art in general. Actually, let me pull up Greek art real quick. There's a trend that we'll notice with this. So if we look at classical Greek art, and of course, pre-classical, you'll notice, especially here's one piece, for example, you'll notice that a lot of them are side profiles. So here you can see, you know, the legs moving forward in one direction, the side profiles being shown. Here's another example of them. And you'll notice it's on a lot of vases, pots. That vases were used to contain things, especially like wine, food, you know, minerals, things needed in the household, or in just in general storage. And a lot of the side profiles were just to express the human profile, because the human profile was seen as the closest to the gods. However, when we look at, which one was it? I think it was this. Yeah. So when we look at classic Gorgon artwork, you'll notice that they're completely different. You'll notice that instead of the, here, actually this one's a better example. So you'll notice that when looking at the Gorgon artwork, the feet are doing the same sort of thing. They are moving in the same direction as most of the other Greek artwork. However, the chest, or the torso, is facing the viewer and along with their face. This is how we see almost all Gorgon artwork, is that it's the face facing the viewer. This was meant to emphasize that monstrosity, that sort of otherworldliness that monsters held. And there was a piece of art, let me see if this is from the Met Museum of Natural History and Art. And if we look at this terracotta cup, this is a drinking cup. With this one, this specific one is from 530 BCE. So this is right before, like 30 years before the golden age of Greek culture. golden age of what we see as like Greek democracy and everything. So this drinking cup here, let me get a side profile of it. You can actually see two different specks of artwork on it. Now, yes, I am getting to Medusa. I just want to explain the Gorgons real quick, so that way we get a better understanding of what exactly Medusa is. So for this drinking glass specifically, this was meant to drink wine in. And this is what you would give your guests or use yourself. Now, this one specifically was used for guests because of the fact that it has a Gorgon in the middle of it. Reason being was that as a person sat, drank their wine, and when they emptied their drinking cup, the Gorgon was there staring them in the face. Now, the belief behind it was that if this person was drinking the wine and they finished it, looked at the bottom of their cup, if this person was truly, very fitting music, if this person was very, was such a bad person that they wanted to harm the people of the home, the mother, father, caretakers of the home, if they were drinking out of this cup and they saw the Gorgon, they would themselves turn to stone. So, and even other Gorgon artwork was, let's see, yeah. So, like, for instance, this piece of Medusa herself, this would be over a doorway. So we, like what you would see with the horseshoes that people would put, or that it's believed people would put on their, the top of their doorways for good luck or, bad luck, whatnot. People would put on the Gorgons or Medusa over the doorways to scare off any ne'er-do-wells. So their formation as a protector was very much stark from the beginning. Now, at some point in time, we're not exactly sure when, but at some point in time, the myth of Medusa begins to appear. Because we have the Gorgons, thousands of years prior to, let me bring it back up, thousands of years prior to this drinking cup and prior to this usage of Gorgons, we do actually have, the snake hair, the stone gaze, the, monstrous abilities of the Gorgons, and of the naming of a specific creature known as Medusa. So we believe it's believed that one of the oldest depictions of Medusa herself, or not depictions I should say, but sort of discussions of her, is actually in Homer's Iliad. So if you're not aware, the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. So the Mycenaean Greeks make their way over to Troy because Helen of Sparta was taken by Paris of Troy, and they fought. Kingdom of Troy is destroyed, and then his next book, The Odyssey, is the one of Odysseus coming back to Greece from the Trojan War. So in the Iliad, it is, I believe, book 5, we do have a mention by Homer saying, "And therein is strife, therein valor, and therein onset, that maketh the blood run cold, and therein is the head of the dreaded monster." So they're talking about the terror that is in the fighting. And then he mentions therein is the head of the dread monster, the Gorgon, dread and awful. That is a direct mention, not a naming, might I add, but a mention of the Medusa story, the Medusa myth. Continues on to say, portent of Zeus that beareth the Aegis. And upon her head she set the helmet with 2 horns, and with bosses 4, wrought of gold, and fitted with the men at arms of 100 cities. So there they are talking about how Medusa's head was being used, because it's believed that when Medusa's head was severed, when she died, it went to Zeus and it went to Athena. Went to Athena's shield, known as the Aegis, and Zeus had a belt that was also known as the Aegis that had Medusa's head on it. We're not sure when it officially began, but this Homer was around, I believe, 1100 BCE, and then the story of the Trojan War is believed to have taken place around 1200 or 1300 BCE. So we have that. He also mentions, yes. So she is also mentioned in the Odyssey. And I should have seen yet others of the men of former time, of the past, whom I was fain to behold, even Theseus or Parathonius, or Parathos. Sorry, read that wrong. Glorious children of the gods, but ere that the myriad of tribes of the dead came thronging up, a wondrous cry, pale fear seized me. August Persephone, said the queen of the underworld, might send forth upon me from that house, from out the house of Hades, the head of the Gorgon. So they are already mentioning again the head of Medusa, that awful monster. And then continues on to talk about these ships that were sailing on the oceans. Homer, now this one's actually a very interesting depiction of Medusa, because he shows her as a living entity, as just a head. And as we know, or as we'll come to explain when we get to her actual story, she was, a person with a head and a body, arms, everything. And I'll get to the rest of that later on. But Homer's belief was that the Gorgon, Medusa herself, was just the head. And that depiction actually comes through in, funny enough, our channel's mascot as such. And if we look at like Castlevania has Medusa heads. So there's actually two different depictions in Castlevania, I should mention. So you can't quite. Alright, anyway. So here on the right hand side, you can actually see that Medusa depiction. Oh, here we go. So you can see the Medusa heads, and they're labeled as such, Medusa heads. And they are floating, doing their thing. They'll turn you to stone, they'll hurt you, and that is actually very much in line with the way Homer perceived Medusa and the other Gorgons. As the Gorgons themselves. Now, I'll get into the other Gorgons a little bit later, but it is fascinating to me that this is kind of how it, this is our earliest depiction, but it's still unknown how it began officially. Now, of course, I could be missing the actual origination of the story, but I'll try to find that a little bit later on. As I was discussing earlier with the Gorgon cup, the drinking cup here, there's also a stand that did the same thing. Anything that a guest might unveil would typically have a Gorgon depicted on that item. So, stand to hold, pretty much anything. The three Gorgons were so horrible that whoever saw them would turn to stone. Frequent motif, perhaps because it fit well to a sword. And that's another thing as well, is that having a Gorgon head fits perfectly into your art. So why not use it, even when some others believe that it'll be helpful in your life and protecting you from harm. So, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask at any point in time. Now, let's get into the meat and bones of Medusa. So, one of the very first stories of Medusa herself is the story written by Hesiod. Now, Hesiod was believed to live around 800 BCE, so definite pre-classic era of Greece society. I pulled up already the portion of the Theogony that he mentions this, and we'll read through it here. Ceto bore to Phorcys, both sea god and goddess, the parents of Medusa and her sisters, fair-haired Greek, or fair-cheeked Graiae, sisters gray from their birth, both deathless gods, and men who walk on earth call them the Graiae. So, not only are the Gorgons the offspring of Phorcys and Ceto, but also the Graiae, Pamphero, seraph-robed Enyo, and the Gorgons, whom dwell beyond glorious ocean. So let's continue on. In the frontier land towards night, where are the clear-voiced Hesperides, the land called the Hesperides, Steno and Euryale, more modern English would pronounce it as Uriel, and Medusa, who suffered a woeful fate. She was mortal. That's an interesting thing to note, is that Medusa was the only one who was mortal. We'll get into why a little bit in just a bit, but the two were undying and grew not old. So again, immortal. And here we actually state the part of the myth of how she came to be Medusa. Or Medusa as we know her today. With her lay the dark-haired one in a soft meadow amid spring flowers. What the heck does that mean? Okay, so Hesiod viewed Poseidon as the dark-haired one. So he viewed the dark-haired one as Poseidon because it was believed that he had dark hair, and most of his siblings didn't, either having blonde or brown hair. So he was one of the only ones depicted as, there you can actually see, i.e. Poseidon, as a dark-haired figure. And he laid with Medusa amid a meadow of spring flowers. Now, I'm sure you're all aware about how Medusa was, I don't want to say the word, engaged in intimate acts not of her free will. Let's say that. The reason he writes this in is that Hesiod has a lot of moments in his actual writing, not only in Theogony, but others before and after, where he depicts women as sort of the unruly bane of humanity. He did not have a good view of women. So he had a very high view of men, and anytime he spoke about women, especially here with Medusa, he sort of doesn't consider her feelings or her perspective within the story. But let's continue. And when Perseus cut off her head, there sprang forth great Chrysaor and the horse Pegasus, who is so called because he was born near the springs of the ocean. Yes, so it's considered that Chrysaor, a flying pig, weirdly enough, and Pegasus, a flying horse, were the children of Medusa. Not only the children of Medusa, but also of Poseidon. Some people have said also Perseus, because he was the one to actually cut off her head, which in turn birthed them, but I don't know. In either case, this is Hesiod's version of the Medusa myth, or the start of her creation into a Gorgon. So yes, she was a Gorgon first and foremost, but it was because of this, suffered a woeful fate, which was having the intimate act with Poseidon and then being killed. She was also transformed into the more Gorgon-esque figure. So the snake hair, the fangs. And I do want to briefly mention the fact that we see a lot of times that Medusa is shown to have a snake body, which is interesting to say the least, because there's not an actual mention that Medusa had a snake's body. More than likely, that her figure comes from the fact that she had snakes for hair, and so they just put her on a snake body, because the Greeks really loved chimeric creatures, or they really loved to create chimeras, which I don't blame them. If you're really gonna, go into what goes bump in the night, chimeras are the way to go. But the thing that I absolutely love with the Medusa story is that it didn't just end here. It continued on, hundreds, if not thousands of years later on. When we look at about 1,000 years later, keep in mind, 1,000 years later, the Medusa story was still being told, was still being depicted, even in art. If we go back to, here we go. So we have Gorgon depictions in Roman art. So even when I don't know if you can hear it, but my cat is tearing up paper behind me. But even after the Greek culture had sort of given way to the Roman society, they were still using the Greek Medusa. And so during the Roman Empire, or during the Roman Empire, it was the empire at that point, Medusa was still being seen as a monster Gorgon. And Ovid, a famous writer, storyteller of the Roman period, or the Empire period, in his book, The Metamorphoses, he tells the story of Perseus. Perseus being the son of Zeus, who was cast away and had to find the Gorgon Medusa to free his mother from a tyrannical king. Now, we'll cover Perseus in a later date, but since we're just focusing on Medusa herself. But as Perseus in Ovid's Metamorphoses, he shows Perseus telling the story of Medusa and what happened during that time. And he even goes to mention how Medusa came to be. But first one is the fact that she, even with her head decapitated from her, or, away from her body, her powers are still there to turn people to stone. Well, now, since you show me the little kindness, accept a gift. This is him to the tyrannical king. Turning away from himself, he held out Medusa's foul head on his left side. Again, left side, sinistre. I should say, the Romans believed that the left side was the side of evil. That's why the Latin for left is sinistre. So, continues on. Atlas became a mountain as huge as himself had been. Now his hair and beard changed into trees, his shoulders, his hands into ridges. What had been his head before was the crest of the mountain summit. So he turns, even at this point, turns a titan into a mountain with the power of Medusa's head. When he talks about defeating the sea serpent here, he washes his hands after the victory in the seawater drawn for him, and so that Medusa's head, covered with snakes, is not bruised by the harsh sand, he makes a ground of soft leaves. So, in this, even though Medusa has been killed, her head is, essentially being held by Perseus, held captive, essentially, he still actually kind of holds a modicum of respect to her. Because at this point in time, during Ovid's telling of Medusa, the belief, the story, the perspective on Medusa has started to change. While Hesiod in the past had talked about Medusa in a more negative fashion, that, she was the one who laid with, she willingly laid with Poseidon, and it's her fault. Here, they're starting to change that a bit. Yes, she still lay with Poseidon, but they're starting to have a more not so evil perspective, for lack of a better term, on Medusa. And he even goes on to tell the story of Medusa herself. So he still finished speaking before they wished. This is somebody asking Perseus about the story. Next, one of the many princes asked why Medusa, alone among her sisters, had snakes twining in their hair. The guest replied, "Since what you ask is worth telling, hear the answer of your question. She was once most beautiful and the jealous aspirations of many suitors." So they're showing her as a human, having human qualities. She is gorgeous. She is a person. Of all her beauties, none was more admired than her hair. I came across a man who recalled having seen her. They say that Neptune, the Roman version of Poseidon, Lord of the Seas, violated her in the temple of Minerva. There is our key term of this entire thing: violated. So it's not that she willingly laid amid spring flowers. It's now depicting her that she is violated as such. In the temple of Minerva, Jupiter's daughter turned away and hid her chaste eyes, her virgin eyes, behind her aegis. So she already had her shield, so that it might not go unpunished. So in this depiction, Athena, or Minerva at this point, knows the act is going on, but she has to turn her gaze because she is a virgin goddess, but because of the fact that she cannot, by her standing, she cannot go against her own uncle, because her father is Zeus, and if she did that, she would get 100% shunned out. Again, still having that, that lesser view towards women, but now they are actually starting to show that Medusa is more so a person than how she was depicted in the past. She changed the Gorgons' hair to foul snakes, and now to terrify her enemies, numbing them with fear, the goddess wears the snakes that she created as a breastplate. At this point, with the metamorphoses, with Ovid, the Roman belief, the Roman sort of perspective on Medusa has now changed from the old Greek view and perspective. That it was her decision, but instead is now a violation against her. Now, as that story kind of progresses, we now get into the more feminist view of the modern depiction of Medusa. Was it this one? Okay. So, our modern depictions of Medusa still show her with the snake hair and the snake body. Here we go. So, this is from Smite. Snake hair, snake body, everything is snake-like qualities. However, if you're a fan of the Percy Jackson series, the new show actually brings in that more feminist perspective, or that evolution of the Medusa myth into turning her into more of a sorrowful figure, a figure that was sort of tortured and betrayed. And with that betrayal I mean from the god Poseidon, Minerva, or Athena, instead of turning her into a Gorgon as a punishment, turns her into a Gorgon, or it turns her into the snake, snake-haired Gorgon, as sort of a method to ward away any further harm. So, if another person or god were to come up to her to violate her, she could now have the power to change that person, or change that god, into stone, killing them essentially. Now, so for her sisters, it was kind of the same thing, because they were transformed as well as at the same time into the Gorgon snake-like monster that is Medusa. So her other sisters, Steno and Euryale, were also transformed into the snake-haired Gorgons by the time of Ovid's telling of the Metamorphoses. And the reason that her sisters, Euryale and Steno, were immortal was because of the fact that they weren't the ones who were violated, but it was Medusa, being the one who was violated, that became the mortal one. So, again, it's a very unfortunate thing, but Medusa is a fascinating example, and a very good example, in my opinion, of the belief of Greek mythology transforming and evolving over time and still being relevant in today's modern era. Let me see if there's any other art that we might want to look at. Oh, yes. So let me go back to this. So as I had mentioned previously, there's no actual here's a better picture. So there's no actual telling or wording in any media that I found of her entire body becoming snake-like, which more than likely comes from the fact that she got snakes as hair to help her turn men into stone. In my opinion, one of the absolute best depictions of Medusa herself is surprisingly in Assassin's Creed. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there is a boss that you have to face that is Medusa. And playing through the game, I absolutely love this fight. Because it depicts the myth surrounding her lair amazingly. Like, people are turned to stone. It's like everything is dead in the area, which is fantastic, because that's what it would be like. Any direction that she looks into, like, things turn to stone. And that's exactly what's the case here. As well, she is very much like human-bodied, but she's still depicted as a monster with the snakes for hair, being a Gorgon. And then another depiction that I absolutely love is in Hades with Medusa. There she is. Absolutely adorable. One of my all-time favorites. And again, it does really well in tying into Medusa being in Hades with Homer's depiction. So I really love seeing the developers of games actually use classical Greek mythology, or classical mythology in general, correctly, in all honesty. Because, as we had mentioned prior, with, was it this one? Yes. So, August Persephone might send forth upon me of the house of Hades the head of the Gorgon, that awful monster. They used Medusa correctly. She would be part of the house of Hades. So, it's fantastic to me, and I absolutely love it. And that is going to end today's lesson on Medusa. Of course, I know I didn't cover absolutely everything, but I just wanted to... This is our very first lesson in general. So hopefully you learned a little bit, you enjoyed it. If you want to know more, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments down below. Always happy to answer any questions you might have. We won't reveal our next lesson. We're going to be doing these once a week, every Saturday or Sunday, depending on how I'm feeling. But we'll be doing these lessons once a week, discussing our favorite myths, legends, not only their history as seen in classical Greece or the ancient era, but also in our modern media and modern video games. So again, let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what you would like to see a lesson on. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.